Hello and happy Women's Day. My name is Olena Komisarenko, and I am a junior thematic coordinator of the Village Women for Economy, and I'm also a fellow of the Economy of Francesco. Today, I'm very happy to welcome all of you on a wonderful occasion to talk about the topic that we could not ignore. AI is filling most of our spheres of our life, and the topic of our meeting today that we're going to discuss is intelligence of life, women and the future of human knowledge, with a wonderful and our dear guest, Professor Consuelo Corradi. But before we begin our meeting, our webinar today, I would like to pass the word to representative of the Economy of Francesco team, Henrique. You're most welcome.
Hello, Elena. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for this space. And first of all, happy Women's Day to all of you. It is a real joy to welcome you today on behalf of the Economy of Francesco Foundation for this webinar dedicated to the International Women's Day. Once again, we come together to celebrate this important date, a moment that invites us not only to recognize the achievements, leadership, and contributions of women around the world, but also to reflect on the work that still lies ahead in building societies and economic systems that are more just, inclusive, and attentive to human dignity. Within the Economy of Francesco, celebrating this day has become a meaningful tradition over the past years. On previous occasions, we marked International Women's Day through global reading marathons that brought together participants from many parts of the world. Scholars, young people, entrepreneurs, and members of our community joined from different countries to read, reflect, and share texts that help us better understand the role of women in economic thought, social transformation, and the building of a more humane society. This year, however, we felt it was important to open a somewhat different kind of conversation. We are living in a time of rapid technological transformation. The development of artificial intelligence and other digital technologies is reshaping not only our economies, but also how we understand intelligence, work, responsibility, and even what it means to be human. In this context, we felt that creating a space for reflection on human intelligence, experience, conscience, and responsibility was both timely and necessary. And this question also connects very strongly with the role of women in our societies and in the economy. Within the Economy of Francesco, the participation and leadership of women are not only important, they are essential. Across our global community, women are contributing through research, entrepreneurship, social innovation, and cultural reflection. They are leading projects, inspiring new forms of economic thinking, and helping broaden how we understand responsibility, care, and the purpose of economic life. Their voices and experiences remind us that transforming the economy is not only a technical or institutional task, it is also a cultural transformation, one that requires new ways of thinking about relationships, cooperation, and the dignity of every person. This is very much at the heart of the journey that the Economy of Francesco has been pursuing since its beginning, bringing together young economists, entrepreneurs, scholars, changemakers who want to rethink the economy in the light of the common good, fraternity, and care for our shared home. And this is also why I would like to take this opportunity to warmly invite all of you to continue this conversation with us in May during our international conference at the Roots of Economic Ethics. The conference will gather scholars, practitioners, and members of the EoF community to reflect. This is also why I would like to take this opportunity to invite all of you to continue this conversation with us in May during our international conference. I apologize. My voice was returning to me here. Sorry. So in May, we will have at the Roots of Economic Ethics. The conference will gather scholars, practitioners, and members of the EoF community to reflect on some of the most pressing questions of our time, including technological change, environmental challenges, social inequalities, and the ethical foundations that should guide economic thought and practice today. In a time of profound transformation, we believe it is essential to return to the roots of economic ethics, to ask not only how economies function, but also what values, responsibilities, and visions of the human person and how these should help shaping them. Registration for the conference is already open, and you can find all the information and register directly on our website at francescoeconomy.org. And we would be truly happy to welcome many of you there and continue this dialogue together. And if you would like to stay connected with the Economy of Francesco community beyond today's webinar, I warmly invite you to follow us on social media and YouTube. You can find us everywhere, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and here on YouTube at Francesco Economy altogether. You can also visit our website, francescoeconomy.org, and subscribe to our newsletter to stay updated about our initiatives, publications, and future events. Thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you, Professor Corradi. Thank you, Olena, and the entire Women for Economy Village, which helped us a lot building this and past and future initiatives directed not only to women, but to the future of our economy. And I wish you all a meaningful and inspiring webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Henrika. Talking about the conference in May, already registered and looking forward to that. So it would be great to see even more of us and more of new participants on this occasion. And during this event right now, today, during our webinars, those of you who are following on YouTube are most welcome to write your comments and write your questions in the chat. So we will also interact in that way. And right now, I'm very happy and honored to pass the word to Professor Consuelo Corradi, who is a professor of sociology at LUMSA University here in Rome, Italy, where she teaches technological innovation and social change. She was vice president of the European Sociological Association, vice rector for research and international relations in LUMSA University, and senior member of the Italian National Council for Universities. Her main topics of interest include the condition of women in contemporary societies, the abuse of women's biocapital in human tissue of global markets, and women's movements against violence. She is currently working on a book on the human body and digital technologies. So, dear Consuelo, the floor is yours. Most welcome. And thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you, Olena. Thank you all for the invitation. I am very grateful and I'm honored to celebrate March 8 with you. We live in a remarkable moment because for the first time in history, women across the world are being recognized in law, in institutions, in public discourse, as fully empowered individuals, as thinkers, leaders, creators, decision makers, not as exceptions. Women are protagonists. This is not a complete process and it's not equal everywhere. But in my view, the direction is clear and it is irreversible. And yet, in this moment, something else is happening. The world is being reshaped by artificial intelligence, by systems that process information at speeds no human mind can match. Systems that predict, optimize, generate, decide. They're changing medicine, education, law, the economy, everything. So here's the paradox I want to begin with. Just as women are finally recognized as full bearers of intelligence, the very idea of intelligence is being redefined. It is flattened and handed over to machines. What does it mean to be recognized as an intelligent person if intelligence itself is being outsourced? What is the value of human knowledge, women's knowledge, anyone's knowledge, in a world where a machine can produce a legal brief, a diagnosis, a sermon, a symphony, and it can do it in seconds? This is not a rhetorical question. It has consequences. One consequence is dangerous, that women enter the system fully, only to find that the system no longer needs what they most deeply know how to do. Women's empowerment arrives just in time for the evaluation. But there is another consequence, a more demanding consequence, that this moment is a call to ask what intelligence really is, what knowledge is really for, and who has been carrying forms of knowing that the world is only now beginning to understand it cannot live without. This is what I want to explore with you today, because I believe that the intelligence of the future is not artificial. It is alive. Let me propose a distinction, not a clean one. Reality is never clean, but a necessary distinction. There is what I call instrumental intelligence, the intelligence of calculation, analysis, abstraction. It asks, what is the most efficient path from A to B? It built our science, our medicine, our legal systems. It is how we mapped the genome, designed bridges that don't fall, and track epidemics before they became catastrophes. This is not a minor thing. This intelligence has saved hundreds of millions of lives. To romanticize its limits is a luxury that only the already safe can afford. And it is exactly what machines now do better than us, faster, cheaper. That is simply true, and we should not look away from it. Then there is what I would like to call living intelligence. But I want to be careful here, because this is where the argument can become sentimental. Living intelligence is not emotion. It is not the idea that feeling something deeply makes you right. We know that's not true. Emotional responses can be biased. They can be self-serving. So let me say what living intelligence actually is. It is the capacity to hold complexity that resists quantification. When a doctor reads not just the chart, but the person, their fear, their family situation, what they are not saying, that doctor is not being unscientific. She is integrating data that has no code. When a teacher understands what a student's silence is not indifference, but shame, and she adjusts not the curriculum, but her posture, she is exercising a form of perception that no algorithm currently possesses. When a community leader in a fragile neighborhood knows that the moment to push is not now, that trust needs 3 more months, that this person needs to speak before that one, this leader is navigating extraordinary complexity without a spreadsheet. This is living intelligence, the capacity to read what cannot be fully formalized and to act responsibly within it. Living intelligence is the intelligence that asks the question machines never ask on their own. Should we? Artificial intelligence can tell you the optimal way to do almost anything. It cannot tell you whether it is wrongdoing. It cannot tell you who gets hurt, what kind of world you're building while you optimize. That question requires judgment. And judgment requires something that only a life fully lived can produce. Now, the honest complication. These two intelligences are not clearly separable. They are not gendered by nature. Men exercise living intelligence, women exercise instrumental intelligence brilliantly. And they always have, even when denied the credentials to prove it. The history of women in science, mathematics, philosophy, theology, art is full of minds of the sharpest analytical power. The difference here is not biological, it's a historical difference. For centuries, women were systematically assigned to the domains where living intelligence operates: the home, the body, the sick, the young, the old, the grieving. But something unexpected happened in those assigned spaces. Knowledge was built, real knowledge, tested by reality every single day in conditions where error has an immediate human face. Knowledge of how people actually work, what they actually need, when they are lying to themselves and when they are not. That knowledge was not recognized as knowledge. It had no journals, no degrees, no citations, but it accumulated. It was transmitted, woman to woman, generation to generation. And it is still here. The question now is, what do we do with it? Let me be more concrete about the danger I named at the beginning. When I said that empowerment might arrive just in time for devaluation, I did not mean only that women's job will be automated. That is true, and it matters. But it is not the deepest version of our problem. Here is a deeper version. We live in a moment when the female body itself has become a resource, not metaphorically, literally. Eggs, embryos, gestational labor, breast milk, placental tissue, these are traded in global markets. They are processed, extracted, sold, often from women in the global south to consumers in the global north, often under contracts that cannot anticipate how human tissue will be used because the technology moves faster than the law, faster than consent. As a sociologist, I have studied this. And what strikes me is not only the exploitation, though the exploitation is real. What strikes me is the grammar of it. The body is treated as open access, as raw material available for use. The person who produces eggs and tissue becomes invisible. The mothers who sell breast milk are invisible like dairy cows. The women who donate eggs are invisible in the biography of the children born from them. The commodity circulates and the woman disappears. This is not a detour from our topic. It is the sharpest version of it. Because what is being extracted and sold in this example is precisely what I call living intelligence, the body's knowledge, its capacity to generate, sustain, nurture life. Instrumental intelligence and the market have found ways to take it apart, sell the components, and erase the person. Artificial intelligence can tell you the optimal way to do almost anything. It cannot tell you whether it is worth doing. It cannot tell you who gets hurt. It cannot tell you what kind of world you are building while you optimize. These questions require judgment, and judgment requires that only a life fully lived can produce. That distinction is not rhetorical. It is the ethical line of our time. For centuries, the work that women did in homes, in communities, in fields, in sick rooms was not counted. It was not in the GDP. It was not in the productivity statistics. It was completely taken for granted. We know now that this was not a measurement error. It was a political choice, an enormous quantity of labor, knowledge, and skill was systematically rendered invisible. That invisibility is ending, slowly, unevenly, but it is ending. And yet, precisely as it ends, a new form of invisibility is being constructed. Not the invisibility of the housewife whose labor doesn't count, but the invisibility of the woman whose body is disaggregated into components and whose knowledge is absorbed into systems that no longer need to acknowledge where it came from. The question for you as economists, as scholars, as entrepreneurs is this: what does it mean to build an economy that can actually see this, that counts what has always been uncounted, that values what has always been extracted without compensation? I don't see this as a welfare question. It is, for me, a design question. It is a question about what kind of economy you and I are building and for whom. There is a question that economists have been asking for at least 2 decades without fully answering it. Why do some systems, like organizations, cities, communities, consistently make better decisions than others, even when they have access to the same data? Not better decisions occasionally, but consistently, over time, across different kinds of problems. The answers, when researchers look closely, is almost never about the quality of the information, is about the quality of the judgment applied to the information. And judgment, it turns out, is not a soft skill. It is a specific, learnable, transmissible capacity. It involves knowing which data to trust and which to interrogate, knowing when the model is wrong, knowing what the numbers are not telling you and why. It involves, in other words, exactly what I called living intelligence. Now, here is what I want to say to you directly. The institutions that have historically excluded women from judgment were not only unjust, they were epistemically impoverished. They were making decisions with half the available intelligence. And they paid for this repeatedly in crises that more diverse rooms might have avoided, or at least seen coming. This is documented. It's not a hypothesis. But I want to go further than the diversity argument, because the diversity argument, as usually made, still operates with a lens of instrumental intelligence. It says, add women, improve outcomes, measure the improvements, justify the inclusion. I am not satisfied fully with that argument, not because it is wrong, it is right, but because it accepts a framework I want to challenge. It treats women's presence as an input to someone else's system, as a resource to be optimized. What I am proposing is different. I am proposing that the knowledge women have developed is not an input, but a foundation. It is the kind of knowledge without which a system cannot ask the right questions in the first place. Let me be specific. The capacity to hold contradiction without resolving it too early. To stay present when complexity, rather than forcing it into a decision tree. To understand that a person is not reducible to their file, their credit score, their diagnosis. These capacities are not personality traits, they're cognitive capacities. And they are capacitated that the domains women have historically inhabited, such as care, education, community, the long-term management of human relationships, systematically develop. Not because women are naturally more compassionate. That framing is a trap, and I will not walk into it, but because competence follows practice. And for centuries, women practiced in domains that required exactly these capacities, daily, under pressure, with real consequences. That is an enormous accumulation of knowledge. The question is whether the systems we are building, your companies, your institution, your economic models, are designed to receive it, or whether they are designed, as most systems still are, to process only what can be quantified, to recognize only what arrives with credentials attached. If the latter, then you are not building the future. We are rebuilding the past with better technology. Most of the conversations happening right now about women and artificial intelligence are not, in my view, very serious. They are important sounding and very well intentioned. They produce declarations and gender equality indices. They measure the percentage of women in tech and count female board members. None of this is wrong. Some of it is necessary, but it leaves the deepest questions untouched. The deepest question is not, how do we get more women into the systems that exist? The question is, what would systems look like if they were built with the full range of human intelligence from the beginning? That is a different question. It requires a different kind of ambition. I want you to give 3 concrete areas where this ambition is not utopian, where it is in fact already happening, imperfectly, but really. The first is the design of care economies. For most of economic history, care, the raising of children, the support of the elderly, the maintenance of community, has been treated as a residual, something that happens after the real economy does its work. We now know that this model is failing demographically, socially. Societies that cannot care for their children or their elderly are societies in decline, regardless of their GDP. The economists who are rethinking this are not just asking how to fund care better, they're asking something harder. What does an economy look like when care is treated as productive infrastructure? Not as a welfare transfer, but a foundation, like roads, electricity, the rule of law, a foundation without which nothing else functions. That reframing did not come from nowhere. It came in large part from women who spent decades insisting that what they did was work, real work, skilled work, work that produced value the standard models could not see. That insistence was a form of knowledge, and it is slowly beginning to reshape economic thinking. The second area is organizational intelligence. There is growing evidence that organizations which integrate what I have called living intelligence into their decision-making are more resilient. They recover faster from shocks. They catch risks earlier. They retain people longer. This is not because these organizations are kinder. It is because they have learned to treat uncertainty differently, not as a problem to be eliminated by better data, but as a condition to be navigated by better judgment. And judgment, as I said, requires exactly the capacities that living intelligence develops. The practical implication is this. If you are building an organization, the question is not only who sits at the table, it is what kind of intelligence the table is designed to receive, what questions it knows how to ask. Most tables are designed to process information, not to generate wisdom. The difference matters enormously, and the cost of the difference shows up eventually in every crisis that was visible to some people in the room and invisible to the people who held the power. The third area is the governance of artificial intelligence itself. This is urgent. I will not soften it. The systems being built right now, the LLMs, the predictive algorithms, the automated decision systems in hiring, lending, healthcare, criminal justice, war, these systems are trained on human data. They replicate human patterns, including human biases, including centuries of inequality, including the systematic under-evaluation of exactly the kinds of knowledge we have been discussing. An algorithm trained on historical hiring data will reproduce historical hiring discrimination. A medical diagnostic system trained on data collected mostly from male bodies will systematically underperform for female patients. This is not speculation. These failures are documented and they are already causing harm. The governance of these systems, who decides what they optimize for, whose interests they protect, what values are built into their design, the governance is the most consequential policy questions of the next 20 years. And it is a question that, in my view, requires living intelligence to answer, not instead of technical expertise, alongside it, in a genuine dialogue with it, with the power to say, no, this system should not be built, or not like this, or not yet. Women need to be in those rooms, not as tokens, not as people whose knowledge of what systems do to people they were not designed for. This is structurally necessary to get the answer right. This is what building differently means. It does not mean dismantling what works. The bridge still needs to be engineered and the vaccine still needs to pass clinical trials. It means refusing the hierarchy, refusing the assumption that what kind of knowing is real and the other is supplementary, refusing to build systems that can only see half of what is true. That refusal is not sentimental. It is not only about being good people. It is about building things that actually work for everyone over time. And that is, in the end, a question of intelligence. I'm now coming to closing my speech, and I want to end where I began, not to repeat, but to arrive. We live in a remarkable moment. I said that at the start, and I meant it without irony. This is genuinely remarkable, the convergence of women's rising recognition and the radical transformation of intelligence itself. It is uncomfortable, and it is ours to navigate. But I want to leave you with something more solid than simply optimism. There is a temptation in gathering like this one to end with a call to action. 5 things you can do, a list. I'm not going to do that. Not because action doesn't matter, it does. But I think the action that is needed right now begins somewhere before the list. It begins with a decision about what you believe knowledge is. If you believe that knowledge is what can be measured, processed, and scaled, then the future is already written. The machines will do it better. Women will participate in that future on the same terms as men, which is to say, on terms that were never designed for either of them as full human beings. But if you believe, as I do, that knowledge is larger than that it includes what cannot be fully formalized, that it lives in judgment, in context, in the capacity to ask, should we? When every other system is only asking, how? Then the future is not written. Then this moment is an opening. This paradoxical moment is an opening. The knowledge that women have built over centuries in the spaces they were assigned, tested daily against reality, that knowledge is not a supplement to human intelligence. It is a core of it. And the world needs it, not as a gesture towards inclusion, but as something foundational, something without which the systems we build will continue to be at their center impoverished. I am a sociologist. I study how societies organize knowledge, who produces it, who owns it, who it serves, who it lives out. And what I see looking at this moment is this. For the first time in history, the knowledge that women have carried is being recognized, not as the soft counterpart of real thinking, as knowledge with structure, rigor, and consequences. That recognition is incomplete. It is now contested by powerful forces, but it is happening, and you are part of it happening because you are women who have chosen to think seriously, to build carefully, to ask the harder questions. Those questions are not decorative. They are the most important questions of our time. The intelligence of the future is not artificial. It is alive. It is here. In this conversation, across continents and time zones, on a day, March 8th, the world has set aside to say that women's knowledge matters. Make it matter. In every room you enter, every decision you shape, every system, you have the power to build differently. That is the work, and it is worth doing. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for this deep and meaningful lecture and this grounding for reflection. And I would like to continue our discussion and to pass to the part related to the participation of some of our fellows from the Academy of the Economy of Francesco. First of all, I would like to invite Diana from the group Feminist Economics to share her thoughts and ask her question from Philippines. Diana, you're most welcome.
Thank you so much, Olena, and thank you so much, Professor Consuelo, for a very thought-provoking remarks, no, on on the importance of women, and at the same time also of the knowledge women has. It was very an insightful presentation, and I really appreciate how all of the things that you've mentioned highlights the central role of care in sustaining both societies and economies. Often economic systems treat care as peripheral or private, yet as your discussion reminds, our care is in fact foundational to society, to social reproduction and human flourishing. One of the most important contribution of the discussion, I think, is the way it reframes care not merely as labor or service, but as a relational and social practice embodied in institutions like families, the state, and the market. And this perspective pushes us to rethink traditional economic frameworks that prioritize productivity and market outputs while overlooking the relational foundation that make economic life possible. So my question would be on this, no, on this matter as well. Like, how can economic system better recognize, measure, and support care without reducing it purely to a commodified activity? Given that up to now, no, like we recognize care as an unpaid work.
Are we collecting question, or should I reply to Diana's question?
Please reply to Diana's question.
Okay.
Then we're going to ask a question with Isaac. And then in the end, we are going also to answer some questions which we're collecting right now in the chat live on YouTube. So you're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Diana, for your question. I think it's very at the center of my talk. I think that in some countries this is already done, and as I said, the most important thing for me is not to count what is happening in domestic settings, to count the hours that housewives spend in the home caring for children. The most important question, the foundational question is, how is care, whoever does care, I hope that some of women's care will also be performed by men in their home. How is care shaping rich economies, not impoverished economies? By rich, I don't mean wealthy, by necessarily wealthy, but economies that are not impoverished, that are not unjust, economies that are democratic and they are diverse. I think that is really the most important question. And I think that in some countries, this is already happening. And from what I see, the direction that women have taken, that women's movements, women's thoughts, women's knowledge has taken globally, I think we are on a good track, although I recognize, of course, that not everywhere is the same.
Thank you very much. So right now, I would like, this occasion is such a pleasure. Isaac, you're most welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Professor Corradi, for a really powerful and profound talk. And I thought that it was a very welcome message on International Women's Day, which unfortunately, I think in some cases has become a little bit of an example of the kind of surface level approach to feminist economic thinking, or what it would mean to have a feminist reform of the economy. Yeah. There were three questions that I wanted to quickly ask. It was so fascinating. Could talk about it all day. But the first question was going back to your distinction between instrumental and living knowledge, which I appreciate. As you said, there's no perfect distinction, but a distinction is an important starting point. I wonder whether we are conceding too much to instrumental knowledge if we characterize science and scientific sort of advances and progress as somehow the fruit of only instrumental knowledge. Because after all, as kind of historians and sociologists of science show in one way or another, cultural ideas, as it were, are always in one way or another already embedded in science. The idea of the person, or there's all kinds of distinctively human cultural ideas bound up in language and culture, which have become embedded in what we think of as science and the products of instrumental knowledge. And therefore, and that's significant precisely because of the kind of examples you mentioned, where scientists, medical scientists, or other kinds of scientists, in order to produce good science, these qualities of living knowledge, judgment, context, and meaning are important in producing the good scientific results. And that this might seem sort of sophistry or playing with definitions, but I wonder if it's important to not concede to instrumental knowledge the kind of superiority or parenthood of science, if we are to push back against the idea that it's impossible to produce valuable knowledge, including scientific knowledge, only with recourse to instrumental reason. And it seems to me this is important in the context of the AI debate, because what we're here trying to push back against is precisely the idea that AI is a kind of form of human substitute. It does substitute for human intelligence, which seems to, yeah. My second question is around, I guess the kind of the way you characterize sort of where we currently are with relationship to the sort of women's rights and recognition of the full humanity of women. And you emphasize that there's a kind of general tendency towards the recognition of full rights, even if this is not the same in all places, but that at the same time, precisely as this takes place, there's a new form of invisibility being enacted in the form of AI. It does seem to me that in the current moment, I wonder whether it's not simply that we're seeing a kind of uneven trajectory in some places, it's not as advanced as in other places, but we're actually seeing a reaction in many parts of the world, a reactionary move, both in sort of global north, global south. There's active anti-feminist movements coming to power and agitating and having a lot of influence. And in addition to the sort of anti-living knowledge which is embedded in the AI moment. And I wonder, is there not a relationship between these things? You know, after all, within the kind of Silicon Valley imaginary and within the Silicon Valley coalition of actors, aren't there kind of implicitly patriarchal dimensions as well as implicitly patriarchal dimensions? And don't we need to kind of bring those together in the analysis to fully understand what's going on and to respond robustly to the dangers of AI and the inhumanities of what's at stake with AI? And finally, final question, relating a little bit to something that Diana picked up on, I guess is about the relationship between the concept of living intelligence and of reproductive labor. In your example about care work, you point to the sort of struggle of feminist activists and feminist economists for the recognition of reproductive labor. But there's also, it seems to me, a sort of overlap between some of the kinds of things referred to by the concept of reproductive labor and that of living intelligence. So I wonder what is at stake in using this concept of living intelligence. Is it some, you know, how does it relate to the concept of reproductive labor? You know, what's at stake in sort of making knowledge the thing to be agitated for as opposed to a form of labor, or are they both needed and how do they relate? So thank you very much, and I look forward to reading more of your work about this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Very important and difficult questions. Okay, the first, of course, we can discuss whether or not that category, instrumental intelligence versus living intelligence, is applicable to science, to the development of science. Recently, you said a lot of good science was produced with something more than instrumental intelligence, something different than instrumental intelligence, Isaac. I agree. I think that a lot of what works today, vaccines, for instance, just, you know, to name one thing that saved millions of lives from COVID, I mean, that was from what I understand as a sociologist, basic instrumental intelligence applied to the problem, and very quickly, by the way. I mean, it had to be done very quickly. At the same time, I agree with you that living intelligence is not confined to women. I think I tried to say that in my speech, and we can find it not only in art or in care, but we can find it in technology, in economics, in, say, cooler domains. However, I do think that today there are domains in science where only instrumental technology is working. And you mentioned in your third question, one of those, reproductive labor. Okay, just talking about reproductive labor is actually is actually placing us in a world where life comes, where babies come to life by technology, by choice, by rational choice, by a choice that it's so rational that I can choose my future baby's IQ, the color of her eyes, and the skin color, of course. I don't like at all that expression, reproductive labor. I understand it's labor. I understand that we need human reproduction, or we will, you know, in 100 in 100 years we will die as a species. But if technology is actually bringing to that domain its full capacity, its instrumental capacity, I think we're not producing human beings at all. I think we will produce robots with human beings, I mean, who look like human beings. In that domain, the domain of reproduction, human reproduction, and not only, but I mean, that's a radical example. Technology and science must go together, and I say judgment must come much, much earlier than any kind of technology. And your second question, I agree. We see an uneven trajectory of feminist movements, of women's movements. We also see anti-feminist movements, and we see countries or places in the world where the status, the condition, the knowledge women carry with them is not recognized at all. But at the same time, we see protests, we see criticism, we have anti-feminist movements. So yes, there are powerful forces that are driving against this. But I think that at the same time, we can observe criticism against these forces and a strong voice of women across the world with different outcomes. But they are there, and they're asking to be recognized as human subjects fully.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you. We've got 5 minutes left for a couple of questions from our live chat. So we've got several questions from Rita. Thank you for that. So Rita is asking, how can we promote living intelligence in our communities and organizations? And how can we better value wisdom in our work processes, for example, in a team? And we have also got a question from Mariana. How can economic and technological systems recognize the value and value forms of intelligence rooted in experience, relationships, and care? So we've got 5 minutes for that.
Yes,
dear professors, you're welcome to answer.
Okay, first question, Rita, how do we do it? Well, I think you have to be there. We can do it. I mean, each one of us can do it, and we can do it in networks and communities too, which is also, also very important because it builds up. But I think that every time you, Rita, and walk into a room and you have to take a difficult question, a difficult decision, ask, is this correct? Who is this serving? Is this serving everybody or just a group of people? Who is this group of people? Who is locked out? Who is excluded? So I think that judgment is what I've been advocating all along today. And I think that everybody who is participating in the economy of Francesco, from what I know you, and I knew you at the very beginning for at least 1.5 years, then we parted, and then we're meeting again. But from what I know, the economy of Francesco, each one of you is well placed to ask questions, to understand if the picture is complete, to understand if the good questions were raised before the data were provided. And Olena, remind me what the second question was?
A question from Mariana was, how can economic and technological systems recognize and value forms of intelligence rooted in experience, relationships, and care?
Okay, well, it really depends. In this case, it really depends in what level of the economy you are actually working. If you are working, let's say, in a small size enterprise with a lot of contact, human contact daily, that it's, say, if you are willing to do it, it's easier because you have the human faces in front of you. And I think the human faces are extremely important because you immediately see the possible consequences or the consequences of your decisions. If you are working at the very top in an organization, then say it's not so immediate, but I still think you can and you should do it. And you as a woman are well placed to do it by, before the list of action, ask yourself what comes before writing the list. Who wrote that list? Did I wrote the list? Who else should be in the list? Okay, now the list is convincing. So we can go to action.
Thank you so very much. I'm so pleased that on such kind of words, so perfectly on time, we are closing our webinar today. Thank you for this deep reflection on how different artificial intelligence is from living human reason. And I would like to thank you, Professor, for this lovely lecture. I would like to thank Isaac and Diana for participation and presence, also for kind words to Henrique, and special thank you to Valentina Erasmo for supporting in organizing this event. Thank you. And
thank you
again,
for having me.
Greetings on a happy Women's Day.
Happy Women's Day.